There is a truth no one dared to tell you, a truth that lives in the quiet corners of your house and breathes no matter how hard you try to ignore it. It begins on an ordinary morning when you open the curtains the same way you did for years, but something feels slightly out of place, like a picture frame that has been moved an inch to the side. You do not understand it immediately. You simply feel the air of the house leaning differently, as if waiting for footsteps that no longer come. And in that first quiet moment, your heart understands what your mind refuses to admit. The home that once overflowed with voices now holds only the echo of what used to be. You remember the way the front door used to open and close with the carelessness of youth, backpacks dropped on the floor, shoes kicked aside, someone calling from the kitchen asking what there was to eat. You used to complain about the mess, but inside, you loved every trace of life scattered through the rooms. You knew where everyone was without asking. You could feel them in the walls. There was a warmth in that chaos, a warmth so natural that you thought it would last forever simply because you needed it to. But need is not a guarantee. Time has teeth, and one day, the house stops vibrating the way it used to, and you realize that silence is a presence, not an absence. A presence you never prepared for. It begins slowly. First, a closed door that stays closed longer than usual. Then evenings when no one crosses the hallway. Then nights when you set fewer plates on the table. The transitions are so gentle that they almost seem kind, but they are not. They are a warning disguised as tenderness. A reminder that the life you once held in your hands is stretching its wings far away from your reach. You think you are ready. After all, this is the natural order of things. Parents raise children to fly, but no one warns you that when they fly, they take entire seasons of your soul with them. You are left standing in a quiet kitchen, holding a mug that used to belong to someone who no longer lives under your roof, and you feel foolish for missing a noise you once tried so hard to control. There is a moment, a very specific moment, when it truly sinks in. You wake up on a day like any other, but the house feels strangely hollow, like someone has pressed mute on the world. There are no drawers opening, no water running, no distant laugh from a room you pretend not to be listening to. The silence reminds you that everything you built was meant to be temporary. And this realization hits like a wave that has been gathering strength for years. It knocks the breath out of you, not with violence, but with intimacy. A sorrow so quiet you can barely name it. A grief for something that is not dead, but no longer yours to hold. You think of all the small forgotten moments that built your life. The school mornings that left you exhausted. The nights you stayed awake waiting for the sound of a key in the door. The arguments that felt endless. The hugs that ended too quickly. You look back and understand that every irritation was actually a blessing disguised as routine. These memories return to you now with a strange tenderness, like visitors who come unannounced and sit beside you without saying a word. You do not push them away, even when they hurt. You let them sit because they are the only things that still keep the house alive. What they never told you is that the departure of the children creates not only an empty space, but also an invisible ache that follows you from room to room. You do not talk about it because it feels embarrassing to confess that you miss being needed, that you miss hearing your name spoken with urgency, that you miss the sound of a life that revolved around yours. But this ache is not weakness. It is proof that you loved without holding back. And love does not disappear. It simply changes shape and asks you to learn its new language. You notice details others would overlook. The framed photos that once felt current now look like artifacts from a life that belonged to someone else. The hallway that once vibrated with footsteps now stretches endlessly. Even the sofa seems larger, as if the absence of bodies expands the furniture. You wonder if you did enough, if you said enough, if they know how deeply they were loved, even on the days when you were too tired to show it. But guilt is a shadow that grows in silence, and you remind yourself that every parent carries that shadow, whether they admit it or not. Sometimes you try to fill the house with tasks, rearranging drawers, cleaning rooms that no longer get messy, opening windows for air that does not need refreshing. But no matter what you do, the silence returns. It sits beside you like an uninvited guest, not cruel, just present, waiting, observing, asking questions you do not want to answer. You sit with it because you have no choice. And slowly, you begin to understand that the silence is not here to harm you. It is here to reveal you. And if you are reading these words or listening to them, it is because a part of your heart is asking for company inside this quiet space. You are not alone in this experience. Many feel it, but few admit it out loud. So if this truth touches you, if you recognize even a small piece of yourself here, tell me in the comments so your voice does not remain silent inside your own home. And subscribe so you do not walk this path without someone whispering beside you. The silence does not arrive in a single moment. It slips in slowly, almost politely, as if trying not to disturb you. At first, you barely notice it. You think it is simply a quiet afternoon or a day when the wind forgot to breathe. But then, it stretches a little wider. It lingers a little longer. It follows you from the kitchen to the bedroom with the soft persistence of something that knows it will not be asked to leave. You begin to sense it in the spaces between your steps, in the way your own breathing sounds louder than it used to. And suddenly, you understand that the silence has been living here for a while. You just were not ready to listen. There is a moment when you walk into a room and realize that nothing inside that room has moved since the last time you were there. Not a pillow, not a blanket. Not even a glass on the table. Everything waits for you in perfect stillness, and the stillness feels unnatural, like the house is holding its breath. You look around and remember how this same room once had a life of its own. Cushions thrown anywhere, shoes under the couch, a jacket hanging where it should not be. You used to sigh at the disorder, rolling your eyes as you picked things up. But now you would give anything to find even one sock out of place just to prove that life is still happening close to you. It is strange how silence changes the weight of objects. The clock on the wall does not tick louder, but you hear it with painful clarity. The refrigerator hums in a way you never noticed before. Even the sound of a turning page feels intrusive, as if the house is listening. And the strangest part is how the silence begins to shape your thoughts. You start remembering things you had packed away years ago. A laugh that once echoed down the hallway. A door that used to slam too hard. Someone calling your name from another room. These memories rise slowly, like dust in sunlight. They do not hurt immediately. They hurt after a few seconds, when you realize they are memories because they can no longer happen again in the same way. Some mornings you wake up and try to trick yourself. You put on the coffee the way you used to when everyone lived under the same roof. You prepare too many cups without thinking. You set the table with automatic gestures, as if your hands still belong to the time when the house was full. Then you stop. You stand there with a spoon in your hand, staring at the extra cup, and the silence wraps around you like a cold sheet. It does not mock you. It simply reminds you of the truth, that your routines have not caught up with your reality, and maybe you have not either. There are days when you try to fill the void. You leave the television on even when you are not watching. You open windows just to hear the outside world. You clean the same drawer twice. You talk out loud to yourself while cooking, pretending it is just commentary and not loneliness. But the silence has a strange intelligence. It returns every time you stop moving. It returns every time you take a breath. It knows exactly when to settle back into its place. What no one prepares you for is the moment when the silence stops feeling like a visitor and begins to feel like a witness. It watches you as you move through the house. It sees the small moments you never show anyone. The way you pause before entering a certain room. The way you run your fingers across a photo frame. The way you sit on the edge of the bed at night, feeling the weight of your thoughts. The silence sees it all, and instead of filling your world with noise, it asks you to face the things you once avoided through distraction. Sometimes it reveals truths that hurt in a slow and delicate way, like the realization that you were so busy surviving the noise of raising a family that you forgot to prepare for the quiet that comes after, or the quiet understanding that the house did not become empty in a single day. It emptied itself over years, moment by moment, month by month, until one day the balance shifted and you were the only one left to hold all the memories. And yet, there is something strangely sacred about this silence. It contains every version of you, the tired parent, the hopeful dreamer, the person who gave everything without measuring the cost. When you listen closely, you notice that the silence is not truly empty. It carries the ghost of every laugh that once lived here. It carries the softness of every goodnight kiss. It carries the energy of every argument that ended in love. It carries the footsteps of every season. The house remembers all of it. The silence holds all of it. And even though it hurts, there is a hidden tenderness in being surrounded by the echoes of a life you built with your own hands. And if any part of this truth touches you, If you also feel the strange weight of a house that once overflowed with life, tell me in the comments so I can hear you inside this silence. And consider subscribing so this space can continue to hold voices that understand what your heart is trying to say. There is a kind of suffering that does not scream. It does not tear the skin or shake the body. It settles inside you like a second heartbeat, steady and heavy, and it follows you through the quiet corridors of your life. Simone Weil understood this type of pain with an almost frightening clarity. She believed that suffering, when faced without denial, becomes a form of attention so pure that it exposes the deepest truths of the soul, not because the pain is noble, not because the pain is beautiful, but because pain removes illusion the same way fire removes impurities from metal. You are left raw and trembling, but also unmistakably real. When the children leave and the house goes silent, a strange kind of suffering begins to unfold. It is not the pain of tragedy. It is the pain of seeing your own life without distractions. You no longer have the noise of daily emergencies to protect you, no lunchboxes to prepare, no doors opening and closing, no voices calling from upstairs. There is only you. And for the first time in many years, you can hear the subtle rustling of your own thoughts, thoughts you kept buried because caring for others filled every corner of your time. Now that the house is still, those thoughts rise like smoke from a fire you forgot you lit. Simone Weil described attention as the rarest and purest form of generosity. To pay attention to something is to give it your entire being. But she also believed that suffering forces attention in ways nothing else can. When you are hurt, truly hurt, you cannot pretend. You cannot escape into small distractions. Pain strips away the superficial and demands that you look directly at what you have avoided. That is what happens now in this chapter of your life. The silence becomes a spotlight. It reveals your fears, your regrets, your unmet desires, your exhaustion, your memories that no longer have a place to land. It reveals the parts of you that remained unfinished while you were busy raising a family. There is a moment when you experience this suffering in a very physical way. You are standing in the doorway of a room that once belonged to someone who now lives miles away, and suddenly the air feels heavier. The bed is perfectly made, the books untouched, the posters still pinned to the wall as if waiting for a younger version of a person who no longer exists. You run your fingers across the desk, and there is a thin layer of dust, the kind that accumulates only when time is no longer being lived inside that space. This tiny detail feels like a small wound opening, and you wonder how many other places in your life have gathered dust while you were busy with everything and everyone except yourself. Simone Weil believed that suffering becomes meaningful only when we allow it to teach us something about the true nature of our being. She never romanticized pain. She starved herself during wartime, not because she wanted to be a martyr, but because she could not bear to live in comfort while others starved. Her suffering was a form of radical attention to the world, an act of confronting reality without flinching. And in a much quieter way, you are doing the same. You are confronting the reality that the life you built has shifted, that your identity has changed, that the person you were when your children were small no longer fits the shape of this present moment. There is a softness in this realization, but also a deep sorrow. You notice it when you open the cabinet and see the cups your children once used, each with its own little memory attached. You find it when you fold laundry that now consists only of your own clothes. You feel it when you cook and instinctively prepare too much, then quietly put the rest away. These small moments accumulate into a kind of aching knowledge. Simone Weil would say that this knowledge is not punishment, it is invitation. An invitation to recognize your own soul again after years of being consumed by the needs of others. Sometimes the suffering becomes most intense when you least expect it. You may be in the middle of a supermarket aisle, reaching for something you used to buy for your family, and suddenly your chest tightens. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because for a split second, your brain forgot that life has changed. You catch yourself preparing for a world that no longer exists, and the grief comes as quietly as a sigh. It is in these moments that Simone Weil would ask you to pay attention, to notice the tenderness hidden inside the ache, to understand that this suffering is not a sign of failure, but a sign that your heart is still alive, still capable of love, still connected to everything it once held close. And there is something almost sacred in the way this pain connects you to your own history. you begin to see that every sacrifice you made, every quiet moment of exhaustion, every worry that kept you awake, every small act of care that no one noticed, all of it formed the invisible stitching of your life. Now that the house is silent, you can finally see the stitching. You can feel its weight. You can acknowledge everything you carried without anyone ever knowing. This recognition is painful, but it is also transformative. Simone Weil would say that suffering becomes luminous when it leads to truth. It does not make the truth easier. It simply makes it undeniable. And if any part of this reflection speaks to what you are feeling in this season of your life, share your experience in the comments so your voice can be heard in this quiet moment. And consider subscribing, because your presence here adds warmth to a space that understands the depth of what you are living. There comes a moment in life when you catch your reflection, and for a split second, you do not recognize the person looking back at you. The face is familiar, yes, but altered in ways that feel both strange and intimate, lines where there used to be softness, shadows beneath the eyes that were not there before, a kind of quiet fatigue that does not come from lack of sleep, but from years of being responsible for so many lives other than your own. And yet beneath all of this, something inside you pulses with a stubborn kind of youth, a fire that refuses to dim simply because time has changed the surface. It is a strange contradiction. The body grows older, but the inner self stays untouched by the clock. There is a part of you that still feels 25, the part that still dreams loudly, still longs deeply, still sees possibility in almost everything. But the world does not see this inner fire. People look at your age and assume the story is already written. They assume you want nothing more than comfort and routine. They assume desire fades and curiosity weakens. They assume your spirit moves slower just because your knees do. They do not understand that your soul has not aged at the same pace as your body. It is still calling to be recognized. There are moments when this truth rises unexpectedly. You hear a song that used to make you feel alive, and suddenly your heartbeat quickens. You walk past a place you once dreamed of visiting and feel that old spark of longing. You remember a version of yourself who had plans, who had her own identity beyond caregiving, and you wonder where she went. But she did not disappear. She went quiet. She learned to step aside so others could grow. She waited patiently in the background while you poured yourself into raising a family, into surviving responsibilities, into holding everything together, even when you were breaking in small, invisible ways. The body carries the marks of this devotion, the tired joints, the slower mornings, the skin that no longer pretends to be untouched by time. But inside, the soul protests. It whispers in dreams. It pulls at you when you are alone in the house, and the silence leaves space for old desires to reveal themselves. Sometimes it feels like two different selves living in the same body, one weary from decades of giving, the other restless from decades of waiting. There is a curiosity here that few people talk about. The older we get, the more memory becomes a kind of second home. You find yourself revisiting moments from the past, not because you want to return to them, but because they remind you of who you were before you became who everyone else needed. Memory becomes a compass, pointing back to a self that deserves to be welcomed again. And yet these memories can sting. You look at old photos and feel a tug in your chest. Not sadness exactly, more like a gentle ache that says, I remember you. Do you remember me? Sometimes the ache grows sharper when you realize how much of your life was spent being strong. You carried the emotional weight of an entire household, often without acknowledgement. You were the steady one, the anchor, the shelter, the one who woke up early and went to bed late because someone always needed something. Your soul remained vibrant, but your body absorbed the cost. And now that the house is quiet, you notice the contrast more than ever. The young soul inside the aging body feels like a bird trapped behind a window, tapping softly to remind you it is still alive. There is a tenderness in recognizing this divide. You begin to care for your own fragility with the same compassion you once gave to others. You start noticing the small signals your body sends, the slower rise from a chair, the deeper sighs at the end of the day, the way your hands sometimes tremble when you lift something heavy. These details used to frustrate you. Now they feel like messages from a body that has served you faithfully for decades, asking for the gentleness it was once denied. And in these quiet interactions between body and soul, you start realizing that aging is not a decline, but a shift in awareness, a deep remembering of everything you have lived through. But the world rarely sees this beauty. Society often treats aging as something to hide, something inconvenient, something that diminishes value, as if wisdom were less visible than youth, as if endurance were less impressive than speed. You begin to feel invisible, not because you lack worth, but because people look through you instead of at you. They do not see the strength it took to survive every chapter of your life. They do not see the dreams you still carry. They do not see the young soul inside the seasoned body that still longs to be called by its true name. This longing becomes sharper in the stillness of the house after the children leave. You may find yourself touching the mirror lightly with your fingertips, tracing the outlines of your own face, trying to reconcile the person you were with the person you have become. It is not vanity, it is recognition. It is the soul asking the body to remember that it still has things to feel, to explore, to discover, to reclaim. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to understand that aging is not the closing of a door, but the opening of a different one that leads inward rather than outward. If this reflection resonates with your own experience, if you recognize the young soul living inside you even now, share a piece of your story in the comments so your voice can fill this space with truth, and consider subscribing so you can continue walking this journey with others who see the beauty and strength in every season of life. There is an error so subtle that most people spend a lifetime making it without realizing how deeply it shapes their destiny. It does not come from malice or neglect. It comes from love, from instinct, from the quiet belief that the best way to care for others is to place yourself at the very end of the line. It begins the first time you choose someone else's needs over your own, and then the next time, and then the next, until the pattern becomes so automatic that you cannot imagine living any other way. Years pass, decades pass, entire seasons of your life pass, and you do not notice the slow erosion happening inside you because you are too busy being everything to everyone. You give your time without measuring it. You give your energy without protecting it. You give your attention without questioning whether there is any left for you. You become the reliable one, the strong one, the one who always figures things out. And while others evolve, discover themselves, make mistakes, grow, leave, return, search, collapse, and rise again, you remain in the center, anchored in responsibility. Because someone has to hold everything together. You tell yourself you do it out of love, and you do. But somewhere along the way, love becomes intertwined with duty, and duty becomes heavier than your own dreams. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that grows from this pattern. It is not the exhaustion that sleep can fix. It is the exhaustion of self-abandonment. You convince yourself that you will take care of your own needs later, when things calm down, when the children grow, when the bills settle, when the house is finally quiet. But later keeps moving farther away, like a horizon that retreats the closer you walk toward it. And then one day you wake up and realize later has arrived, but the version of you who was supposed to enjoy it has been neglected for so long that she barely remembers how to breathe freely. This error is so gentle that it feels noble, but it has consequences. When the people you built your entire identity around eventually follow their own lives, as they should, you are left holding a life that does not feel like yours. You walk through the house and feel the weight of choices you made without understanding their cost. You see photos on the wall and recognize the faces, but not the person you were in those moments. You look at yourself and feel a strange emptiness, not because you regret what you gave, but because somewhere along the way, you forgot to keep even a small part of yourself for yourself. There is a story many parents live without ever saying it out loud. It is the story of realizing that you became an expert at carrying others, but a beginner at carrying yourself. You know how to calm someone else's fears, but not your own. You know how to comfort a child, but not the ache that grows inside your chest when the house becomes too quiet. You know how to give advice, but you hesitate when asking for help. You know how to love deeply, but you hesitate when loving yourself with the same devotion. This imbalance is not a failure. It is simply a pattern that went on too long without being questioned. It often becomes clear in little moments. You open a drawer and find old birthday cards that thank you for everything you have done, and the words warm your heart, but also sting a little because they remind you how much of yourself you poured into other lives. You hear someone say, "Take care of yourself," and you smile politely because the phrase feels foreign, almost like it is meant for someone else. You walk past a mirror and see a face that looks tired in a way that goes beyond age. a tiredness that comes from being the foundation for so many years without ever resting on one yourself. And then the most painful realization arrives. You understand that the error was not loving too much. It was believing that loving deeply meant disappearing slowly. It was believing that devotion required silence. It was believing that sacrifice was the only language of love. The truth is that love expands when the person offering it is whole. But no one teaches you that when you are young. You learn it only now, in this new chapter, when the house is quiet and you can finally hear your own soul speaking again. The soul speaks softly but clearly. It says you cannot continue living as a shadow. It says you were never meant to disappear. It says the world may not see your worth, but you must. It says you deserve to reclaim the pieces of yourself that were left behind in all the years of doing, giving, tending, fixing, managing, comforting, and surviving. This message arrives slowly, but once it arrives, it does not leave. It sits beside you like a small flame waiting for you to breathe life into it. If you feel this truth resonating inside your chest, if you have ever lost yourself in the process of loving others, share it in the comments so your story can be heard by someone who needs to feel less alone, and consider subscribing so you can continue walking this journey with a community that sees you, values you, and understands the quiet battles you have faced in the shadows. There comes a point in the quiet of an empty house when you begin to wonder why the presence that once felt so close now feels impossibly distant. It happens in small moments at first. You sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and a question rises inside you that you cannot quite put into words. It is not anger. It is not disbelief. It is something softer and more painful. A quiet ache that whispers, "Why does everything feel so silent now?" You wait for an answer, but nothing comes. And the silence around you deepens, heavy and watchful, as if it knows something you do not yet understand. This is the silence that Simone Weil understood with a depth that few people ever explore. She knew that when everything external falls away, the soul becomes more exposed, more vulnerable, and more aware. It is precisely in these moments, when life feels stripped of noise and certainty, that many people begin to feel abandoned. They imagine a missing presence. They interpret the quiet as rejection, and they wonder what changed or what they did to deserve this distance. But Simone believed something radically different. She believed that silence is not absence. Silence is a form of attention too intense for ordinary days. It is difficult to accept this when you are alone in a house that used to vibrate with life. There are mornings when you open the curtains and the light feels colder than it used to. You stand in the doorway of the living room and the stillness feels almost personal, as if life itself has stepped outside and forgotten to come back in. You try to busy yourself with small tasks, folding blankets, rearranging books, wiping the counter even when it is already clean. But no matter how much you move, the silence stays. It follows you gently, refusing to break, refusing to reassure you. There is a particular kind of silence that arrives after the children leave. It is not empty. It is concentrated. A silence that holds every memory, every sacrifice, every late night, every worry, every hope you once carried in your chest. This silence is dense. It contains decades of your life, and sometimes standing inside it feels unbearable, because you can hear things you spent years outrunning. The truth of your own exhaustion, the question of who you are now, the long-forgotten dreams you once promised yourself you would return to, the fears you hid behind routine. All of it emerges in the quiet. Simone Weil believed that this emergence is not a punishment. It is a calling. She used to compare the silence of the divine to the quiet presence of someone who loves so deeply that they refuse to interrupt your freedom. A presence that steps back not out of cruelty, but out of respect for the soul's unfolding. When everything is loud and busy, you do not have the space to discover who you are beneath the roles you play. But when life becomes still, when the house empties, when no one needs you every second, something unexpected happens. The silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, you see yourself with a clarity you never had before. But clarity can feel like abandonment when you are not ready for it. You may sit on the edge of your bed at night and whisper a question into the darkness, hoping for some sign, some warmth, some reassurance that you are not walking through this chapter alone. You may feel the ache of every unanswered prayer, every moment when you reached out and felt nothing reach back. You may wonder why the comfort you once believed in feels so remote now. These moments are universal, even if rarely spoken aloud, and they carry a strange kind of honesty that can either break you or transform you. Simone Weil wrote that the greatest test of love is not presence, but distance. Not the moments when blessings feel close, but the moments when everything inside you feels unanswered. In those moments, she said, the soul is being stretched, not harmed, stretched, pulled gently toward a deeper sense of meaning than comfort alone can offer. And this stretching often happens in seasons of transition, especially when the roles that defined your life begin to fade. When motherhood shifts into memory, when companionship becomes quieter, when familiar routines dissolve, the soul is left with space. And space is where the deepest questions live. There are days when this silence feels like a weight pressing on your chest. You may find yourself standing in the middle of a room, not knowing what to do next, feeling suspended between the life you had and the life you have not yet learned to inhabit. On those days, the silence feels merciless, but there are other days too, days when the quiet feels almost sacred. When you hear the sound of your own breathing and it feels like proof that you are still here, still capable of feeling, still capable of awakening to something new, the silence becomes softer then, almost kind, almost like a teacher who has been waiting patiently for you to finally slow down enough to listen. What if the silence you feel now is not abandonment, but invitation? What if it is the space you never had before? The space to discover the parts of yourself that were too often overlooked. The space to ask questions that have waited decades to be spoken. The space to feel grief without hiding it, longing without shame, hope without fear of disappointment. Simone Weil believed that silence is where the soul becomes honest, and honesty is where transformation begins. If you feel this silence in your own life, if you are learning to navigate its weight and its strange beauty, share your experience in the comments so your story can meet another heart that understands this quiet moment. And consider subscribing so you can continue walking this path with voices that will keep you company even when the world feels too silent. There is a truth that arrives slowly, almost reluctantly, as if it knows your heart is not ready for it all at once. It begins with a small realization that feels like a quiet sting. You notice that when your children return for visits, they no longer enter the house the same way. They walk differently, they speak differently. Their eyes carry lives you are no longer part of. You try to adjust, to smile, to ask questions that bridge the distance, but the answers come coded with the rhythm of worlds that have grown far beyond your reach. And in that moment, you finally understand something you have resisted for years. They are not coming back in the way you once imagined, not because they do not love you, but because it is the nature of life to flow forward. You remember how it used to be, the door opening with a burst of energy, the voices floating down the hallway, the interruptions, the questions, the arguments, the laughter. There was a time when they needed you in ways that defined your entire identity. You were the center of gravity. Everything rotated around your presence. But now the rotation has shifted. They have their own orbits, their own suns, their own gravitational pulls. You watch them speak about plans you did not help build, friends you have never met, decisions you were not consulted on. At first, you feel a strange mixture of pride and ache. Pride because they grew, ache because they grew away. There is a moment every parent experiences but rarely admits. A moment when you are standing in your own kitchen, listening to your child telling a story from their life, and you realize that you are a visitor in that story. Not the author, not the guide, not even the reference point. You are simply a listener, a witness. And the realization steals your breath for a second. You smile, you nod, you play the role of the supportive presence, but inside something folds in on itself. Something that once felt essential now feels optional. The role that once defined you has quietly dissolved into memory. Simone Weil believed that truth is often painful before it becomes liberating, and this truth is no exception. It hurts to know that the version of motherhood or fatherhood that once outlined your everyday has completed its cycle. It hurts to see that the deep intimacy you once shared with your children has transformed into something quieter, more distant, more reserved. It hurts to feel the gap between what your heart remembers and what your reality has become. But hidden inside that hurt is a strange and necessary freedom. The freedom begins the moment you stop expecting life to return to what it was. There is a tiredness that dissolves when you stop forcing the past to fit into the present. You begin to release the hope that your children will walk back into the house with the same innocence, the same dependence, the same intensity of presence. You begin to soften into a truth you once resisted. They were never meant to stay as they were, and neither were you. There is a deep and quiet beauty in this acceptance. It is the beauty of seeing your children as complete beings, not extensions of yourself. It is the beauty of watching them make mistakes and learn without your guidance. It is the beauty of realizing that they carry your love within them, even when they are far away. The love did not disappear. It changed form. It became independent, just like they did. You may find yourself observing them during a visit, the way they place their bag down, the way they check their phone out of habit, the way they speak to you with affection, but also with a subtle boundary that comes from adulthood. And you feel the truth settling into your skin. They love you, they cherish you, but they are no longer yours in the way they once were. And that is how it was always meant to be. The real shift happens when you realize that you too are not meant to return to who you were. You are not meant to remain the parent defined only by caregiving. You are not meant to stay in the background of your own life. You are meant to rediscover the desires you left behind, the ones you placed on a shelf because someone needed dinner or help with homework or reassurance late at night. You are meant to reclaim a version of yourself that is not centered on being needed, but on being alive. The truth that scares you at first is the same truth that liberates you in the end. They will not return to the old way, and you should not either. There is a path in front of you that you have not walked before, a path that is yours alone, not shared, not borrowed, not shaped by the needs of others. The quiet of an empty house is not only sorrow, it is also possibility. It is also invitation. It is also the first breath of a life waiting to be seen. And if any part of this truth resonates with you, if you feel the weight and the relief of realizing that life moves forward and asks you to move with it, share your story in the comments so your voice can breathe in this space. And consider subscribing so you can continue this journey with people who understand the courage it takes to let go of what was and open your heart to what is becoming. There is a moment in every quiet house when something shifts inside you so gently that you almost miss it. It does not arrive with fireworks or sudden clarity. It begins as a small pulse deep in your chest, a soft reminder that even though so much has changed, something in you is still alive and waiting. It often happens on an ordinary day. You might be washing a cup at the sink, or folding a towel, or opening a window to let in the afternoon air. Nothing dramatic, nothing significant. And yet in that tiny moment, you feel a flicker, a whisper, a subtle pull toward yourself, a sense that maybe this emptiness is not an ending, but an opening. At first you resist this feeling. You tell yourself it is nothing. You tell yourself that the quiet is simply loneliness pretending to be hope. You tell yourself that new beginnings are for younger people, or braver people, or people who have not spent decades placing their own desires at the bottom of every list. But the whisper does not leave. It returns in the silence between your thoughts. It returns in the heaviness that sits in your chest when you realize that no one is coming home for dinner tonight. It returns when you wake up in the morning and feel an ache not just for what you lost, but for what you never allowed yourself to explore. This is the moment Simone Weil might describe as an inner awakening, the quiet instant when a soul that has been carrying too much finally exhales. She believed that transformation does not begin with grand decisions, but with a simple shift in attention. A moment when you stop running from your own life and turn toward it with curiosity instead of fear. Transformation begins in the smallest of choices. The choice to sit with yourself for a few minutes longer. The choice to say yes to something you would normally decline. The choice to open a door inside you that has been locked for years. There is a powerful truth hidden in these small choices. They do not fix the loneliness. They do not erase the silence. They do not magically return what time has taken, but they begin to move something within you, something that has been waiting too long to be invited back into your life. You may find yourself standing outside on a morning when the sky is still soft, feeling the cool air on your skin, and realizing that you cannot remember the last time you noticed how the light feels. Or you might suddenly crave something unexpected, like taking a different route on your walk, or rearranging a room simply to feel a new flow of energy. These small impulses are not random. They are signals. They are signs that your spirit, quiet for so long, is beginning to stretch its limbs again. Sometimes the shift arrives through memory. You might recall something you loved before responsibilities took over. Dancing, painting, walking by the water, reading until your eyes grew tired. Writing thoughts in a notebook you never told anyone about. These fragments are not nostalgia. They are invitations. They are pieces of yourself that wander back to you, asking if you might be willing to pick them up again. There is something profoundly healing about remembering who you were before life became a series of tasks. It is as though your younger self reaches out from across time, gently reminding you that she still exists and she would like to be seen again. There is also courage in this awakening, even if it arrives quietly. You may feel a pull to do something you have not done in years, to step outside your routine, to choose yourself even in a small way. It might be the courage to go for a walk alone without rushing back home. It might be the courage to sit with your own thoughts instead of numbing them with noise. It might be the courage to sign up for something new, not because you know how to do it, but because you want to feel something different. There is no timeline. There is no rule book. There is only the gentle truth that choosing yourself, even for a moment, begins to awaken the parts of your soul that have been sleeping. You might be surprised by how tender this awakening feels. It does not demand perfection. It does not ask you to become someone entirely new. It simply asks you to notice yourself again, to notice the way your heart responds to small joys, the way certain thoughts lighten your chest, the way hope feels when it returns after a long absence, the way life looks when you allow yourself to believe there is still more to experience. And something remarkable happens as you continue listening to this small internal voice. You begin to reclaim your own presence. You start feeling less like a background character in your own story and more like someone who deserves a place at the center. You realize that your life does not end when others move forward. Your life expands. It asks you to participate not out of obligation, but out of desire. It asks you to stop watching time pass and to begin touching it again. If any part of this quiet awakening feels familiar to you, if you sense even the smallest spark rising inside you, share it in the comments so I can hear the truth of your experience directly from your heart. And consider subscribing so you can continue walking this gentle return to yourself with others who are rediscovering their own inner flame. There is a kind of ending that does not close anything. It does not slam the door. It does not extinguish the light. It settles slowly, like evening falling across a quiet landscape, soft and almost sacred. It arrives not as a conclusion, but as a long breath after a lifetime of holding everything inside. This final moment is not about finishing a story. It is about recognizing the quiet holiness of simply being here, alive, present, breathing in a house that carries the memories of everything you have ever loved. When the noise of the world falls away, when the rooms around you rest in their stillness, there is a silence that feels almost like a presence that asks for nothing from you, not strength, not answers, not certainty. It asks only for your honesty, the kind of honesty that comes when the heart grows tired of pretending it is not hurting. You sit inside this honesty as if it were a small chapel built within your chest. You do not pray for anything. You do not plead for anything. You simply exist inside a moment that feels larger than words. In this space, something profound begins to unfold. You start to understand that every ache you carried, every fear you swallowed, every memory that returns uninvited, every moment of loneliness that pressed against your ribs, all of it shaped you into someone capable of deeper tenderness than you ever imagined. You survived chapters that would have broken many. You gave more love than you were ever given. You held others through storms you weathered alone. And now, in this quiet, you finally give yourself permission to rest in the truth of your own endurance. There is a softness to this realization, a softness that wraps around you like the warm weight of a blanket. You do not need to perform. You do not need to justify your sorrow or your hope. You do not need to hide the longing that still pulses inside you. Everything belongs in this final space. Every version of you is allowed to breathe here. The young soul, the exhausted parent, the grieving heart, the curious seeker, the person you once were, the person you have not yet become. All of them sit quietly together inside the same body, sharing the same breath, held by the same unseen presence that has followed you through every room of your life. And as you sit there, something else becomes clear. You begin to feel gratitude, not in the cheerful way people often describe it, but in a deeper, more solemn way. Gratitude that you lived enough to feel this much. Gratitude that you loved so fiercely it left marks time cannot erase. Gratitude for the moments that broke you open because they also revealed your capacity to rise. Gratitude for the silence itself, because inside this silence you met parts of your soul that had waited years to speak. Perhaps the most surprising gratitude of all is for yourself, for the person who continued on even when she felt invisible, for the person who kept loving when love felt heavy, for the person who held a family together and now must learn to hold herself with the same gentleness. Gratitude for the courage it takes to face your own life without distraction. Gratitude for the longing that still flickers in your chest, because longing is proof that you are not done living yet. This final space becomes a quiet offering, not a prayer asking for anything, but a presence that radiates from you in a way you may not even notice. A presence that says, I am still here, I am still becoming, I am still willing to step into the light even after all the shadows I have walked through. A presence that honors every tear, every memory, every silence, every dream that has survived inside you despite the passing of years. And now, as this chapter of our time together comes to a close, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your courage in listening to words that touch the deepest parts of your story. Thank you for letting your heart open, even in the places that ache. Thank you for allowing yourself to be seen, even if only in the quiet of your own mind. You are not invisible here. You are not forgotten here. You are part of something human, something tender, something profoundly real. If these words have accompanied you gently through this moment, I invite you to share what touched you most in the comments, so your voice can linger in this space with honesty and warmth. And if you wish to continue this journey, to feel held and understood as you walk through the next chapters of your life, I invite you to subscribe so we can keep walking side by side. And now, when you are ready, let your eyes drift to the video appearing on your screen. It is waiting for you like a doorway to the next step, a soft continuation of everything your soul has whispered tonight. Step into it whenever you feel ready. It will be there, welcoming you just as you are.